Hello everyone and welcome to the Fragrance Report, a podcast where we talk about fragrance as it connects to history, art, culture, and all things of that nature. I'm your host Anya, and this week I kind of wanted to do something a bit different. So instead of doing our regularly scheduled fragrance history related programming, instead we're going to be doing a Q&A. Some of you guys submitted your questions and I'm going to be answering them in today's podcast episode. If this is your first time watching this podcast, well, hello, my name is Anya. I love fragrances. I usually publish videos on YouTube 5 times a week. I also host this podcast called The Fragrance Report. It's available on Spotify and on YouTube. And if you're interested in seeing some more content from me, I do publish content on TikTok and Instagram under the username ANECHKAFRAGRANCES. As you know, I like to start off each one of these episodes talking about the favorite fragrances that I've been loving and wearing in my rotation. And I have here like 4 main fragrances that I've been kind of moving in between. So I have a Commodities Orris. This is kind of like a lipsticky, waxy scent with patchouli. I've been layering it with Marussia by Slava Zaitsev. This is an aldehydic, musky, woody, yellow floral vintage scent. I love this combination together. It's quite compelling. So the idea of like a vintage fragrance like Marussia layered with like a waxy lipsticky scent like Orris is something that I've been really inspired by. So this is a combination I've been really drawn to. And then another combination that I actually have received a compliment on has been wearing Anello by Pernoire. This is a beautiful like spice gingery fragrance with pineapple and mango layered with Sora Dora's Mallow. This is a gorgeous orange blossom scent that kind of leans towards a violet marshmallow scent, but it also has a fruity note of raspberry in here. So this combination has also been really good. Both of these fragrances are really powerful. A little bit goes a long way. These are kind of like beast mode fragrances, and you can use my code on them, Anya10, for some money off. Anyway, those are some of my favorite fragrances. Let's move on to the Q&A. So let's get into the Q&A section of this episode. So the first question is, how did your love for perfumes begin? Now, this is an interesting story because my love for fragrances began as a bit of necessity because I kind of had to. I'll explain. So basically, I was working at a beauty store. This was several years back, and this was around the holiday season. And for those of you who've never worked retail before, when you start to get a lot of high traffic come into the store, you're kind of assigned a zone. So people would get assigned to prestige makeup, prestige color, skin care, hair care, I think mass color, mass makeup. It's been a few years, so I forgot like the exact terminology that they use. But essentially, you'd get assigned a zone. And one day I was assigned to the fragrance area. And everyone in the store kind of had a very limited knowledge of fragrance. So whenever I was in that section, I started to really take it upon myself to learn as much as I could about what I was selling. And I started to look up, fragrance videos on YouTube. I found Fragrance YouTube by that point. And I started researching the fragrances I was selling to learn how I could build people's basket. And slowly but surely, I started to get a really big fascination for fragrances because I did nothing for several hours a day except just be in the fragrance section and smell all the fragrances. And I began to get really good at selling fragrances to the point that if I wasn't working that shift, people would get pretty upset because I would be the one that would automatically get assigned to the fragrance section. And I think most everyone at the time in the store that I was working at did not like being assigned to the fragrance section at all because they thought it was pretty boring. I did not. So I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed selling the fragrances I was selling, and I was watching fragrance YouTube on the side, and it was kind of interesting because at the time, since I was working retail, and I think I had an internship at that point as well, but I was working retail, I had my internship, I did not have a lot of spending money at all, and to be quite honest, around that point, I also started to discover Middle Eastern fragrances, and that was time when Middle Eastern fragrances were always going to be like super affordable, or at least like the brands like Latafa, Al Haramain, they were releasing fragrances that were always really affordable. Now, whenever those brands release fragrances, they're usually like marked up higher and then the price goes down. Back then, the fragrances would be released at really affordable prices. So I started like exploring those fragrances, and around that point, I began to get inspired to start creating my own content. So I started creating fragrance content on TikTok, and that's kind of how my love started. So I started kind of like learning about fragrances really quickly because I had to because of my job, and then I began to get obsessed rather fast as well. So that's how I started. Alright, so if you went to one of those make your own perfume classes, what kind of perfume or perfumes would you make? So I actually had the opportunity to attend one of Experimental Perfume Club's classes when it came here to the DMV area, and I'll tell you my combination. So I used cardamom moss, rose rhubarb, and amber iris in my blend. So if you're familiar with those blends from Experimental Perfume Club, then you kind of like, I think we'll be able to tell like the kind of vibe that I would go for if I would blend my own fragrance. But alternatively, I think if I was to create another fragrance, maybe not in an Experimental Perfume Club class or just some other class, I would probably go for something that's a little bit leathery. Like, I love leather fragrances, as many of you already know. I love powdery fragrances, so I'd probably go for something that's like a little bit focused on a suede-like leather, but I would like the opening to be like very bright and zesty, but kind of tart. So probably maybe some pink pepper in the opening, some bright lychee, and then like go into something that's like darker, a bit like more aromatic, slightly animalic. So that would be what I would go for if I was to blend my own perfume in a kind of a class setting. I feel like if I was able to create my own fragrance, I don't know. I feel like I would try to go for something that's a little bit more unique that hasn't been done before as much. So generally, if I was going to blend my own fragrance, I'd go for something that's like bright and zesty, but also something that's like animalic, darker in the dry down, something that has like the ambers. Those are notes that I tend, or those are chords that I tend to really gravitate towards anyway. And if I was going to blend my own fragrance, that would be what I'd go for. The next question is, what are some unusual notes you would like to see more in perfumes? I'm really fascinated with kind of aldehydic notes. So I think Onze Minerale from Cult of Kaori does a terrific job of really going for that hot steam accord. So if you don't know the perfumer behind the brand, Chris, he was inspired by Japanese culture, and he has created this really beautiful brand called Cult of Kaori. And I am really inspired by Onze Minerale because that fragrance actually plays with the yuzu aldehyde note to create a note that smells like hot steam. So something like that is something I would like to see more often in perfumes across the board. I think if brands really start experimenting with notes that we're all super familiar with, like hot steam, but something that we haven't seen in fragrances before, that would be fantastic. I'm also really inspired by the idea of like, you know, creating fragrances inspired by, for example, lipstick. I think a lot of you know that I've been looking for my perfect lipstick scents, and I have been able to find that with Oris by Commodity. I think that's a really beautiful lipsticky scent, but also just like, I think, savory inspired fragrances. So I'm talking about like savory gourmands, fragrances like that. Food-inspired fragrances that are not necessarily leaning towards like sweet gourmands have really been compelling for me. So those are, I think, all-around notes that I like to see more often in perfumery. And I'd also like to keep on seeing like, you know, animalic notes like leather, musks, but done in a really approachable and elegant way. My favorite thing is when I see notes like leather done in a kind of suede leather interpretation, so it doesn't smell too extreme or harsh or animalic, but it smells very elegant and quite put together. So that's something I'm really inspired by. Also, something that I would like to add to my collection, and I would like to see more as well, would be like cold, metallic kind of fantasy notes. So I would be really fascinated to perhaps have a fragrance that you know, smells like a cold metal, or something that smells like what rain would smell like. And of course, those are kind of like abstract, very kind of like yeah, those are kind of abstract ideas. But when I think of fragrances, or when I think of adding fragrances to my collection, or fragrances that I would like to see more of, I'm thinking of fragrance notes and fragrance concepts that not a lot of brands tend to explore that much. So I think those, all in all, are some concepts that I would like to see more of. And then the next question was, what were some of the first perfumes you ever bought for yourself, and do you still like them? So the very first fragrances that I bought for myself, I think were influenced by the fact that I was working in in a beauty store where I was selling fragrances. So I got exposed to a lot of designer fragrances at the time. But when I was also first getting into fragrances, I discovered Middle Eastern scents, like affordable Middle Eastern perfumes from brands like Lattafa. So the very first Middle Eastern fragrance that I ever bought was, I believe, either Oud Mood by Lattafa or Al Rahab's Choco Musk. I think I bought those two fragrances pretty close together. Al Rahab's Choco Musk I still actually wear, and I still love, and I still recommend. Oud Mood I don't really wear as much because to my nose right now, the cinnamon in that fragrance is a little bit scratchy. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Oud Mood is kind of like a rose, spicy oud fragrance with caramel as well. It's a beautiful fragrance. It's probably not my cup of tea anymore. I can't really remember the last time I wore it, but I still wear Al Rahab's Choco Musk. Some other designer fragrances that I bought at the time were Mugler by Alien. I still love that fragrance. And what else? Dior's Pure Poison. I bought that fragrance years ago. I still love it. And I think the first fragrance that was ever gifted to me was Coco Mademoiselle by Chanel. And I don't really wear that fragrance as much, but I still love and appreciate it. And around that same time, I think like some of the first, I'm trying to remember. Some of the very first designer fragrances I ever bought were Calvin Klein Eternity, which I don't really wear, and then Acqua di Gioia by Armani, which I also don't really wear. So my tastes have definitely changed because I think when I first started getting into fragrances, I was experimenting with a lot of different things. At one point, I thought I was only really into kind of more masculine scents, which now is not necessarily the case because I thought I was only really interested in fresh aromatics, and then I started veering into super hyper realistic gourmands, and now it's kind of in between. So I think my tastes have definitely changed. I definitely don't wear Calvin Klein Eternity anymore, for sure. But some of those other fragrances I still love. Next question. Which discontinued perfume do you want back the most? So as many of you already know, the discontinued scent that I have in my collection that I absolutely wish would come back would be Narciso by Narciso Rodriguez. That is one of the most sensual, animalic, musky white florals I have ever tried. That is a phenomenal fragrance, and in my opinion, it's the best Narciso Rodriguez fragrance that they ever came out with, which is a really big shame that they discontinued it because in my opinion, it's their best fragrance. So that fragrance I would really love for them to relaunch that one. But also, also Mugler. Mugler's Aura, I do not know why they discontinued that fragrance. Actually, no, I do know because people don't understand it. In my opinion, I think Mugler, before they were acquired by L'Oreal, did some really amazing fragrances. But after they were acquired by L'Oreal, they just started kind of watering down all their fragrances, in my opinion, and they started coming out with fragrances that were more mainstream, and that kind of lost the magic of Mugler for me at that point. Aura by Mugler is an absolutely stunning green and rhubarb fragrance. It's hypnotic, it's gorgeous, it's ambery, it's unforgettable. It's also a kind of vanilla fragrance. I think there's tonka in there. It's really beautiful. Stunning. Beautiful in the tropical weather. It's one of my favorite fragrances of all time, and it's now discontinued, and I'm pretty much half done with my bottle, and I'm kind of rationing it because I checked online. It's so expensive now to get a secondhand bottle of it. It's ridiculous. So yeah, Mugler is probably the fragrance house that I would love to find some vintages from because They have some amazing ones. There's also an alien flanker that I'm forgetting. Let me look it up. So there's an alien flanker called Alien Essence Absolute. This was a fragrance that came out in 2012. And essentially this is like a flanker of the original Alien, but it also features added notes of incense and myrrh. I would have loved to have that fragrance. I mean, obviously I've never gotten my nose on it. I've never tried it. Another fragrance I would love to see come back would be Musk Mysterios. This is another alien flanker, and this actually, of course, is a musky fragrance with notes of spices, saffron, jasmine, cashmere, and white musk and vanilla. I don't know, like those are some fragrances that I would love to see come back. Like I have heard so much about them, and even the original Alien, by the way, because Alien has been allegedly reformulated. Even the original Alien is something I'd have loved to smell, because now the Alien that I have is kind of like a soapy indolic jasmine, and to my knowledge, the original formulation of Alien was something that was more focused on like the indolic jasmine, and it was far less soapy. So I would have loved to experience that. Unfortunately, I obviously cannot. But yeah, those are the discontinued fragrances I would have very much liked to get my nose on. But yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question. I really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. This episode's music was brought to you by Kevin McLeod over at Incompetech. This is Beauty Flow by Kevin McLeod at Incompetech.com and is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license.